couple of days ago, Pope Francis sat down with a 60 Minutes interviewer for an interview that was almost an hour in length, at least when you watch the full thing where they edit in footage of the Vatican and pictures and other things that are sort of extraneous to it. It's about 45 minutes long when you add that stuff in. And they talked about all manner of things, one of which is the subject of deaconesses and priestesses and the like. And most people are sharing a clip from that interview where when Francis is asked about this, he says no. And then they cut the clip off at his answer in the negative. They cut it off when he says no. And then they take that to mean we're through the clear on this. If you watch the rest of what he had to say, you'll notice that he's giving a lot of qualifications. And the qualifications he gives in that are on the issue of holy orders. I will have the full clip for you here. I edited briefly for one thing, and that's to remove essentially padding footage that they put in of a choir of nuns singing. And I pulled that part up for copyright reasons. YouTube does not like music. I mean, it does like music. It loves music. But YouTube will often hit you for copyright issues with music shown. So I will show you that after we get to the main story here, because Cardinal Hollerich, one of the co-chairs of the Synod on Synodality, gave an interview himself where he talked about how he believes the church's teaching on holy orders can be revised, how it has never been infallibly declared, and as such, it's time for us to have a conversation about priestesses, not just deaconettes, but priestesses. So we're going to go over this, and he gave this at the same time Francis was giving his interview to 60 Minutes. So you see kind of a tension here if you take Francis's words at face value. So we're going to go to Catholic News Agency first. The headline, Cardinal Hollerich urges caution, dialogue on women's ordination. Now, his reasoning for caution and dialogue is because, you know, if you push too hard, too fast, people will not accept change. But if you do it incrementally, people will much more likely accept radical changes. And he is 100% right about that. Strategically, the smart revolutionaries know that if they work slowly, sometimes over the course of decades, they will win the battle because people will accept small incremental changes. That is how things happened in the church, starting in the 1950s when the Holy Week liturgy was changed by the same man who, with a committee of Protestants, designed the new Mass. And then afterwards, you got incremental change after incremental change after incremental change, and to the point where many facets of our worship life in the church our ancestors would not even recognize anymore. And so he is 100% right about this. He's urging people to move slowly, be patient. This is that they will win the battle long term. Bear in mind this also with the subject of the next conclave. I believe Hollerich to be a sleeper candidate in the conclave. He's very upfront with what he believes. He probably won't emerge as the next pope when Francis's time is up. But he is somebody who should not be underestimated either, because he could either be a candidate nobody expects in the same way that in 2005, people were shocked when it was Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio of Argentina who nearly became pope because nobody had heard of him outside of South America. In that same way, Hollerich could be somebody like that, but he could also play a very different role. See, word is that bishops, and I reported on this in the past in videos here, that bishops have been meeting and cardinals have been meeting in St. Gallen, Switzerland again. A new crop of a St. Gallen group, we'll call them. And they've been meeting to prepare for the next conclave. And one of the things they want is a pope who will be like Francis on the issues, but will be more charismatic, less prone to saying the quiet part out loud, and somebody that they can control. Because that's one thing they can't do with Francis, is they cannot control him. He has sort of slapped back at them enough to know that they can't control him. So they want somebody that they can keep on a short leash. That's what they want, and they're preparing for it. Now, to be fair, the more conservative cardinals have been preparing too. That's all about those demos letters that have been coming out for the last couple of years, which I've covered also. Let's get to what Cardinal Hollerich has to say here. Quote, Note the date, by the way, May 20th. The interview was given on 17th of May. So, quote, in a new interview, Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich, S.J., suggested that the Church's position on female priests is not set in stone and should be discussed further, at the same time warning of triggering, quote, a huge backlash. Speaking to the official Swiss Catholic portal cath.ch on May 17th, Hollerich, who is the Archbishop of Luxembourg, said the prohibition against ordaining women was, quote, not an infallible doctrinal decision and could be changed over time with arguments. The way I see it, most bishops are in favor of a greater role for women in the church, the Jesuit cardinal said. I am in favor of women feeling truly equal in the church, and we will also work toward this. I don't know if that necessarily has to include ordination to the priesthood. You can't tie everything to the priesthood alone. That would be clericalization. When he asked whether he thought Pope Francis would introduce female priests, Hollerich replied, it's very difficult to say. The Pope is sometimes good for surprises. The Archbishop of Luxembourg added, but I would actually say no. Shortly before the synod, there was a dubia from a few cardinals. They asked whether John Paul II's rejection of the priesthood of women was binding for the church. Francis replied very wisely, it is binding, but not forever. Did you catch that? Hollerich said that Francis said very wisely, it's binding, but not forever. And he also said that theology would have to discuss this further. The cardinal has previously courted controversy on doctrinal matters, emphasized the need for ongoing discussion. It means that it is not an infallible doctrinal decision. It can be changed. It needs arguments in time, Hollerich said. And we'll go over and show you why he's in conflict with actual things the church has said on this. At the same time, the Jesuit cautioned against pushing too hard for changes, noting that if you push too much, you won't achieve much. You have to be cautious. Take one step at a time, and then you might be able to go very far. The interview was conducted by Jacqueline Straub, who works for the official portal of the church in Switzerland and publicly describes herself as called to be a Roman Catholic priest. Her assertion to Hollerich that women were forced to take a back seat in the church was based on a typically European principle of the individual. The cardinal responded. Citing the example of the James Martin crowd after Fiducia Supplicans, Hollerich warned of a potentially huge backlash if the Vatican were to introduce the ordination of women to the priesthood. We have to have these discussions with the whole church, otherwise we will have huge problems later. Then the Catholic Church will fall apart. End quote. He's not wrong about that either. He's not wrong about anything he said there, except for the key issue, which is, of course, that the issue wasn't settled, that it wasn't dogmatic. Good morning to everybody here. Please hit the like button if you can. And I'm going to show you now, we're going to go over here to the actual document that he is in conflict with. So there is a document issued by the Vatican called the Responsum ad Prospicium Dubium concerning the teaching contained in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. It's very short, issued by Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger in 1995. On this question, is this infallible? And Hollerich says no, that the question was never settled infallibly. Note that this is Ratzinger. Note that this is somebody whom they have not hidden their contempt for. So the dubium question, whether the teaching of the church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women, which is presented in the apostolic letter Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, to be held definitively, is to be understood as belonging to the deposit of the faith. That's a fancy way of asking the question whether the church has the authority to ordain women. If we are required to hold that the church cannot do it, if that is infallibly understood. It's a plain version of that. And the response is affirmative. Yes, you have to believe that. This teaching requires definitive assent, since founded on the written word of God, and from the beginning constantly preserved and applied in the tradition of the Church. It has been set forth infallibly by the ordinary and universal magisterium with a Second Vatican Council citation. Thus, in the present circumstances, the Roman pontiff, exercising his proper office of confirming the brethren, has handed on this same teaching by a formal declaration, explicitly stating what is to be held always, everywhere, and by all as belonging to the deposit of the faith. And then a note here saying the statement is approved by John Paul II, signed by Joseph Ratzinger and his secretary. In other words, this has been infallibly declared. But I want to show you where here their entire argument rests. Their entire argument rests that this is the constantly preserved and applied in the tradition of the church. They dispute that. I've showed you on past videos on the subject of women's ordination. They dispute that heavily. They believe that, and as I've shown you in documents promulgated by advocates for deaconesses and priestesses, they believe the early church ordained women. It's in their writings. And so they dispute this. This is how they get past the infallibility question, that this can't actually be infallible, they claim, because the premise was wrong. It was based on wrong facts, things that were not actually facts. That's how they get to a place where they openly question this. That's how you get to a place where you have Cardinal Hollerich publicly saying that the church has to move slowly, that there are arguments that have to be presented, that this has to be done by theologians. That is how you get to that place. Marine says, there are plenty of Christian denominations out there that satisfies their desire, but that is never good enough, is it? They are intent on destroying it for all of us. Well, it's not just that. They now look at it how one Orthodox branch of Orthodoxy has ordained priestesses, or deaconesses rather. Although their metropolitan patriarch stepped forward and said, no, we did not ordain the person. They said that a couple days ago. That having been said, I wouldn't take their word for it. But now I'm going to show you that is all your context that you would need, because Francis gave that interview on 60 Minutes. And everybody plays one clip from it. They play one clip. They play the clip where the interviewer asks him about the ordination of women, and he says no. And then they stop the clip there. And then everybody celebrates, yay, Francis upheld orthodoxy. Well, here's the problem. If you keep watching what he says on that subject, it becomes clear that he's saying with many, many qualifications. And there have been a few of us, myself, Tim Gordon, and a few others, who have said that what it looks like is being done when you read the statements from the synodalists, that they are preparing for a non-ordained deaconess that will in every way look like a deaconess. In a lot of ways, like those fiducia supplicans blessings, look suspiciously like holy matrimony, like the rituals for it. You're going to see something similar. This is a camel's nose under the tent kind of thing. This is the door being opened for it. But here's the interview from Francis, and I have the full thing. Again, I edited one part out, and that's where it cuts from their interview to showing nuns with some music in the background, and I cut that for copyright reasons. But I will have a full clip to the whole 46-minute interview in my show notes at returntotradition.org minutes after this live stream is over. So here's the clip in question.
Growing up, my mother was a Eucharistic minister and a cantor in the Catholic Church. And you have done more than any pope to bring women into positions of power. How are more women changing the Catholic Church?
Las que llevan adelante un cambio son las mujeres.
Women are the ones who move changes forward, all sorts of changes.
Valientes que los varones.
They are braver than men. They know how best to protect life. Women are masterful custodians of life.
La mujer es grande. Es muy grande.
Women are great. They are very great. And making space in the church for women does not mean giving them a ministry, no.
La iglesia es madre.
The church is a mother, and women in the church are the ones who help foster that motherliness.
No se olvide que
Don't forget that the ones who never abandoned Jesus were the women.
los varones escaparon todos.
The men all fled.
You will have many young boys and girls that will come here at the end of next month for World Children's Day. And I'm curious, for a little girl growing up Catholic today, will she ever have the opportunity to be a deacon and participate as a clergy member in the church?
No.
I understand you have said no women as priests, but you are studying the idea of women as deacons. Is that something you're open to?
Si es diáconos con orden sagrado, no.
If it is deacons with holy orders, no. But women have always had, I would say, the function of deaconesses without being deacons, right?
La mujer tiene un gran servicio como mujer.
Women are of great service as women, not as ministers in this regard within the holy orders.
And so you see there, Francis giving you the qualification for it. This isn't just no. It's no with holy orders. That's his position. And remember what Cardinal Hollerich said, one step at a time. Now, you can tell the interviewer is not Catholic. Actually, what's funny about this is she begins this interview by talking about how her mother was a Eucharistic minister, how her grandparents were Catholic. And the first question I had is, well, why aren't you Catholic? But yes, as somebody pointed out in the live comments here, she frames it as a question of power. I wish he had responded to that he could have said that her whole framing of the issue is secular and not Catholic. It is not about power. It's about following the order of things that are created by God. That's what this is about. She frames it, as most of her ideology do, as something, as a question of power. And the really remarkable thing about this thing is that at the very beginning of the interview, Francis talks about how all ideologies are evil, that's weird, but he says all ideologies are evil. I would personally qualify that by saying any ideology that conflicts with the gospel is evil, but all ideologies are evil? I mean, that's interesting. But he didn't say that the ideology of the ladies that woman has clearly subscribed to is evil. He wouldn't quite go there. And maybe that didn't occur to him to say that in charity. But that's what's happening here. This is a question of power for them. But Fritz qualified the question. He said it was about holy orders. And remember what Hollerich said there, that this is a question of theology, that theologians can take care of this problem for them through conversations, through research and making arguments. And the whole premise of this, their entire argument, rests on John Paul II's infallible statement being based on faulty reasoning or bad information, because such then means it can't be infallible, right? If the entire premise of their argument, which I showed you in that document, was that this is the constant teaching of the church, they disagree. They plan to prove that holy orders were conferred to women in the early church. There's no evidence for that. But that is where their argument rests. Female Casey Royals fan says, think about this for a second. There weren't female teachers until 1900 years after the Jerusalem temple was destroyed. Right. Ninth says, you're breaking up a bit. I think there's something going on with YouTube, because I'm noticing this is my lowest performing live stream I've ever had in terms of people watching it right now. That kind of concerns me. And they did an update to their system yesterday, so I'm kind of wondering what's going on here. But yeah, hit the like button. That'll help. If you haven't hit like yet, that will help greatly, actually. But yes, this is not so cut and dry of an issue as they make it out to be. It's weird. They say, like I'm looking at my live analytics right now. It says there are 33 people watching, but I have more likes on the video on this live stream than that. So there's something weird going on here. But Lottie says she had trouble getting onto the page this morning. She had to reboot. Okay, that's it. That's probably what it is. Yeah. Good morning, Flying Tigers. God bless you too. Yeah. There's usually a hiccup after they do some sort of change to their system. The change they made was really good, actually, but it doesn't mean anything to anybody who's not a YouTuber, but it was actually really good what they did. But because there's usually a hiccup afterwards. But yes, that's the context that everybody needs for understanding Francis' statement, that he qualified it with holy orders. And the conversation that has been happening is very clear that they are looking at non-holy orders. And that is the camel's nose under the tent. That is cracking the door open to the further question. And Hollerich lets you see there how they're going to frame the question. It's about theologians making an argument. And in the previous video, I showed you a document given to, I want to say it was Cardinal Francis George in Chicago 15 years ago or something, on the question of deaconesses. And he was given a document by proponents of this question saying, that the early church did actually ordain them, and they had their own citations and their own theological evidence for it, even though it was all shaky and nonsense. They still had their evidence. So that's how they're going to try to do this someday. You're not going to see it now. In the next year or so, maybe the next few months before the Synod on Synodality has its next meeting in October, at some point in the not terribly distant future, you're going to see some argument for non-ordained deaconesses. That's what it's going to be. Ed says, YouTube must have done something because I was on, but your intro came live in the middle of it. Interesting. That's weird. All right, folks. Prayers for female Casey Rose found. Apparently there was a utility outage due to an accident out there. So please pray for her. Mary Woolley reminds us that nuns have been doing the non-ordained thing for centuries. Yeah, going back to, I mean, if you read any of the history of the faith before the Incarnation, there were consecrated women. There were analogs to nuns, and then after the new covenant was established, those coalesced around the old deaconesses to form what we call nuns today. It happened pretty early on. So again, there haven't been the need for the deaconess role went away by the 7th century. All right, folks, I will suggest to you, thank you, Esther. She just came back from the Chartres pilgrimage and prayed for us. I do want to show you actually maybe tomorrow something very interesting about all that, because while we have this Eucharistic Congress going on, there was reports that the San Francisco pilgrimage had only 8 people. But the pilgrimage in France, which totally separate thing, the annual pilgrimage they do, had thousands of people participating in this procession and this pilgrimage. So it's again more evidence that if you make this more traditional, you may have some success. Raven Ray says, even an abbess does not have all the powers of an abbot. That's correct. And an abbot has to submit to the local bishop, by the way. People tend to forget that. All right, folks. Any further thoughts in the comments? If not, we will wrap this up. I will give you some more interesting news tomorrow on some of this stuff. But until then, please. Ninth Crusade, their update from YouTube. I said, no, it doesn't. It actually doesn't. It has to do with content creation and editing and things in the background. That's what it has to do. They may have done something on that stuff too, but I can't even say those words on YouTube. That has never changed. But always, all right, folks. Thanks for tuning in today. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.